Picture this. A struggle so large it stretched from the frozen tundra of Alaska to the steaming jungles of the Pacific. Hundreds of thousands of Yankee infantrymen shipped off to places they could not even point to on a map earlier than the struggle. Now, right here's the actual kicker. Once they were given there were not any barracks, no houses, now not even a roof over their heads. Simply mud, rain, and the factors beating down. So how did America military remedy this? They didn't deliver lumber halfway across the world. They didn't waste time constructing fancy bases. They invented one of the strangest yet only answers you've got possibly in no way idea approximately. The Quonset Hut, a curved corrugated metallic half of cylinder that would pop up everywhere, anytime, and hold soldiers alive. And let me hit you with a range of this is going to stick on your mind. More than 100,000 of these huts have been constructed for the duration of Global War II. It's now not a typo. It's in commercial flood of metallic and sweat changed into houses, hospitals, command facilities, or even chapels. Believe touchdown on a far-flung island inside the Pacific in 1943, and watching this sort of system's upward push out of the dust in an unmarried day, geared up to residence dozens of fellows. It nearly seems like technology fiction, however it changed into real. Here's the shocker. Those huts were not just military brief fixes. They have been a quiet revolution in logistics and housing. Consider it. International War II wasn't just fought with bullets and tanks. It became fought with supply strains, infrastructure, and the capability to maintain men fed, sheltered, and prepared. The Germans had their fortresses. The Japanese had their caves. But the people, they'd a transportable, packable, indestructible hut that might be shipped flat, assembled with a handful of fellows and live on a typhoon. That's the type of area that doesn't make it into Hollywood battle films, but it made a distinction. And if you're thinking, okay, however a hut is only a hut, here's why you may want to stick round. This stuff did not disappear while the war ended. After 1945, they became part of American existence. University dorms, church buildings, diners, even housing for returning GIS underneath the GI invoice. Some of them are nonetheless standing these days, rusting, however cussed. Reminders of a time while the US turned into cranking out battle tools at a pace the world had by no means visible earlier then. So on this video, we are going to dive into how the Quonset Hut turned into born, the way it spread throughout the globe like wildfire, what it was clearly want to stay inner one, and how something designed to be brief became a permanent stamp on history. It's a tale about metal, sweat, and sheer American ingenuity. And accept as true with me, you'll by no means observe a half of cylinder the same way again. By using past due 1941, the US becomes staring down a logistical nightmare. The attack on Pearl Harbor pressured America into a worldwide struggle that would demand troops in every nook of the planet. Millions of men have been approximately to ship out, and every single considered one of them wanted meals, water, and a roof over their heads. But the trouble became clean. How do you house an army that's constantly on the flow? Traditional timber barracks took too long to build, and shipping heavy production substances halfway internationally was out of the question. The Army needed something new, something fast, cheap, transportable, and tough sufficient to deal with the whole lot from blizzards to monsoons. This urgency wasn't pretty much consolation. Squatties combating in North Africa, on far-off Pacific islands, or in frigid Alaskan outposts couldn't have enough money to be weakened via publicity. A sick or exhausted soldier wasn't just one man down. It was a wreck inside the chain of battle. American planners knew they had to resolve the safe haven problem earlier than it snowballed into misplaced battles. The query wasn't if they'd come up with a solution. It became how rapid they might do it. And right here's where the Army stepped in. In early 1941, even earlier than Pearl Harbor, the USA Army found out it would need portable housing for its expanding bases. They did not want bulky tents that ripped inside the wind. They did not want wooden shacks that rotted within the jungle. They wanted a constructing you may field up, deliver everywhere, and bolt collectively with minimum equipment. The type of shape sailors and soldiers should erect in hours, not weeks. On the time, The United States Navy had experimented with something called the Nissan Hut, a British design from Global Struggle I invented in 1916 by foremost Peter Nissan. It became also a curved metallic shape, and the British had used them in France. But the American planners determined it wasn't quite proper. They wanted something simpler, sturdier, and higher ideal to mass production in American factories. In other words, a uniquely American model. And that is where Quonset Point, Rhode Island, comes into the tale. It really is in which the Army commissioned the primary prototype of what would quickly be called the Quonset Hut. The timing could not have been sharper. With the country mobilizing for total conflict in 1941, the race became directly to build not just guns and ships, however an entire transportable world to house the guys who could fight. So by the time American squaddies started shipping out in early 1942, the basis for his or her destiny houses had already been laid. What seemed like an easy curved shell changed into certainly the answer to certainly one of the largest logistical complications of worldwide conflict II. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't flashy. However, without it, thousands of fellows would have been left uncovered within the area, susceptible not just to enemy fireplace, but to the relentless punishment of weather and terrain. This wasn't just about structure. It changed into about survival, and America become about to show that fixing troubles like those speedy and at scale changed into one among its greatest strengths in the struggle. When the military dispatched out the call in 1941 for a new sort of constructing, the process landed within the laps of architects and engineers at George A. Fuller Organization, operating at the Daviesville Naval Construction Battalion Center in Rhode Island. The project became trustworthy on paper, however enormous in practice. Create a structure that became light, reasonably priced, flat, packable, and easy sufficient for untrained men to collect with best the most primary gear. It needed to be rugged enough to withstand tropical warmth, Arctic bloodless, and the entirety in among. The layout they came up with became brilliantly simple. Photo, a 1-2-cylinder manufactured from corrugated steel sheets arched into a 16x36 ft structure. The semicircular form wasn't only for appears. It gave the hut superb power, allowing wind, rain, and snow to slip proper off. At each cease, plywood panels will be geared up with doorways, windows, or vents, depending on the climate and motive. Inside, the huts can be covered with insulation or left bare. The complete aspect became set up on an easy wooden or concrete basis, depending at the website. The primary prototypes were constructed at Quonset Point in mid-1941. That's wherein the huts were given their call. They weren't flashy. They were not high-priced, but they have been exactly what the military wanted. They could be packed into crates small enough to healthy on ships and planes, shipped lots of miles, after which bolted collectively immediately. A team of 6 to 8 men could throw one up in an unmarried day. Evaluate that to weeks of hammering forums for classic barracks, and also you see why the Quonset Hut became an instantaneous hit. The preliminary layout wasn't best, though. The first huts had a 16 ft width, but this proved too cramped for lots uses. Quickly after, engineers increased the design to 20 feet and eventually to 40 t huge variations. Variants quick popped up for the whole lot, from barracks to debris halls, offices, hospitals, or even chapels. The modular layout supposed you can hyperlink huts together, make bigger them, or regulate them on the fly. That flexibility became priceless in battle zones wherein needs changed in a single day. Via past due 1941, the military had already placed huge orders. The design became locked in, and factories started out stamping out corrugated metallic panels via the ton. The Quonset Hut turned into formally rolling off production traces, at the same time as America was nevertheless reeling from Pearl Harbor. By the time U.S. troops were landing on Guadalcanal in August 1942, the huts were already there, waiting to shelter them. Its smooth-to appearance returned now, and noticed the Quonset Hut as inevitable. However, it truly wasn't. It became born out of a selected second of urgency, a marriage of commercial might and sensible design. Without K-factor, without that Navy order, without the fast paintings of those engineers, the conflict might have looked very extraordinary inside the Pacific and beyond. The splendor of the Quonset hut became its simplicity. Steel arches, plywood ends, and a promise, irrespective of where you dispatched American troops, that they'd have a place to call home, even though it become just for a night. As soon as the layout became finalized in 1941, the United States did not simply build Quonset huts. They churned them out in numbers that defied perception. The United States' industrial muscle was already gearing up to produce Liberty ships, Sherman tanks, and B-17 bombers. Adding a hut to the list seemed small in assessment, but it became one of the maximum prolific wartime merchandise of all. By 1945, greater than 100,000 Quonset huts had rolled out of factories, sufficient to residents complete armies. How did they do it? The secret was the equal components that drove American wartime industry, mass manufacturing. Factories throughout the USA had been retooled to stamp corrugated metal sheets, cut plywood panels, and bundle kits that contained each nut, bolt, and practice needed. Every hut changed into shipped as a flat percent kit weighing approximately 5 heaps. It could be loaded into the keep of a Liberty ship alongside jeeps, rations, and ammunition, then offloaded everywhere inside the world. The Fuller employer and different contractors failed to waste time with complex blueprints. Each hut became standardized, which meant employees may want to build them like automobiles on an assembly line. The size had been predictable, the elements interchangeable, and the instructions easy. A box of Quonset hut components turned into like a massive Lego set for grown guys, except those pieces built the infrastructure of a global war. Numbers inform the tale exceptional. In 1942, the Army ordered over 25,000 huts nearly straight away, and manufacturing handiest elevated from there. Factories in Rhode Island, New Jersey, and later throughout the Midwest worked across the clock. By means of 1943, whole ships left American ports wearing not anything however Quonset hut kits, and the guys trained to assemble them. The tempo becomes so relentless that huts had been regularly constructed quicker than the military could determine precisely in which that they had crossed. But the real miracle changed into how few men it took to raise one. 6 or 8 infantrymen with wrenches and hammers could put up a hut in less than an afternoon. No cranes, no skilled carpenters, no engineers on website, simply manpower and a container of parts. That speed meant newly captured islands could be converted into functioning bases nearly in a single day. Airstrips unexpectedly had barracks for pilots, kitchens for mesh halls, and offices for command posts. A bare patch of jungle should develop into a mini town in less than a week. It is really worth evaluating this to the enemy. While German troops had been digging into bunkers and Japanese garrisons were burrowing into caves, American forces have been building metallic cities that rose nearly right away. It wasn't glamorous, but it meant that any place America flag landed, a functioning base observed close in the back of. Through the stop of the warfare, production figures rivaled some of the most important hardware programs of the battle. Quonset huts were not simply housing. They have been a symbol of America's capability to outproduce, outdeliver, and outbuild its enemies. It became one aspect to send infantrymen foreign places. It changed into some other factor completely to give them a ready-made home, ready in a crate wherever they landed. Living inside a Quonset hut changed into, in contrast to something maximum American soldiers had ever skilled. For many, it turned into their first time far from domestic, and abruptly their house became a curved shell of corrugated metal planted on foreign soil. Those huts were no luxurious cabins, however, as compared to snoozing in a tent that leaked rain and iced up at night time, they have been a godsend. The interiors will be adapted relying on the theater of war. Inside the South Pacific, the huts were often coated with insulation to stupid the relentless warmness, and displays have been added to keep out clouds of mosquitoes. In less warm climates, assume Alaska or Northern Europe, stoves have been mounted, on occasion one at each quit, to maintain the relax at bay. Timber flooring stored men off the dust, and improvised partitions gave a touch of privacy. Still, maximum soldiers remembered them as loud, echoing, and frequently sweltering within the daytime. But right here's the issue. Quonset huts weren't just barracks. Their flexibility made them into regardless of the Navy wanted on the time. Some became mess halls wherein masses of guys lined up for rations. Others were converted into area hospitals with rows of cots and the odor of antiseptic within the air. There have been huts used as chapels with crude altars constructed underneath the curved roof in which squatties sang hymns lots of miles from home, command posts, storage depots, classrooms, even theaters for makeshift film nights. If it wanted a roof, a Quonset hut could do the process. A soldier arriving on an island like Guadalcanal in 1943 would have visible a sprawl of huts rising almost in a single day, turning a raw patch of jungle right into a functioning army camp. The huts gave an abnormal sense of permanence in locations that were in any other case alien and opposed. They had been symbols of Yank resourcefulness, evidence that irrespective of where you had been shipped, a few slice of structure and order observed. Of course, there were downsides. The metal walls magnified the pounding of rain till it became deafening. Within the tropics, the inner should experience like an oven. Ventilation was often poor and humidity should warp the timber ends. But infantrymen tailored, rigging up makeshift fans, reducing extra home windows, and doing something it took to make the huts livable. In any case, compared to foxholes or outdoors tents, this turned into still a step up. Letters domestic from GIS often referred to the huts, sometimes with humor, every so often with criticism, but almost always with gratitude that there was something between them and the elements. Within the phrases of one Marine stationed in the Pacific, "She ain't quite, however she keeps the rain out." This is all a man can ask for, and perhaps most significantly, the huts offered an odd sense of normally. You could grasp your gear on a nail, line up your cot, and know that as a minimum for the night time, you weren't on the mercy of the jungle or the wilderness. For a soldier a long way from home, that small consolation turned into well worth extra than gold. The Quonset hut didn't simply stay in American camps. It spread like wildfire across the globe, following the improvement folks' forces anywhere they went. From the seashores of Normandy to the jungles of latest Guinea, these 1-2 moon shelters became a part of the panorama of world conflict II. No matter how far off the place, odds were correct which you'd find a cluster of huts forming the backbone of a base. Within the Pacific, they have been imperative. While U.S. Marines landed on Tarawa in 1943 or on Uima in early 1945, establishing a foothold wasn't just about shooting floor. It turned into about constructing infrastructure. Quonset huts gave them that immediately. Airfields needed control towers, radio rooms, weather stations, and preservation shops. In preference to ready weeks for production, crates have been opened, steel arches had been bolted, and inside days a naked island bristled with homes. A few bases in the Pacific ended up with loads of huts organized like a small town, complete with roads and signs and symptoms. In Europe, they were simply as crucial. After D-Day in June 1944, as Allied troops pushed deeper into France, Quonset huts observed close at the back of. They sprouted in Normandy as makeshift hospitals for the wounded, offices for logistics groups and barracks for engineers. By the time winter hit the Ardennes for the duration of the War of the Bulge, Quonset huts had been being used as heated shelters, giving troops a destroy from the freezing Belgian forests. However, perhaps the maximum surprising deployments had been in extreme climates. In Alaska and the Aleutian Islands, huts were constructed to face up to typhoon pressure winds and bitter cold. In North Africa, they were planted in dusty camps under a blazing sun, where their curved steel roofs contemplated warmness away better than canvas tents ever should. In every environment, the same principle applied. A flat percent building may be shipped and raised faster than any conventional production. The worldwide footprint became dazzling. By way of 1945, there have been pretty huts on each continent besides Antarctica. Soldiers joked that you can tell wherein the people had been via recognizing those metal half of circles on the horizon. They have become symbols of America's military presence, immediately recognizable even to civilians who had in no way seen them before. And it wasn't just people who used them. Allied countries obtained Quonset huts through lend-hire applications, setting them up in Britain, Australia, and even the Soviet Union. They have been accepted due to the fact they labored, and due to the fact no different U.S. Had solved the hassle of cellular housing at such scale. The huts became so commonplace that many soldiers assumed they had remaining all the time. They became barren islands into functioning cities, carved order out of chaos, and gave troops the infrastructure to preserve combating hundreds of miles from domestic. If warfare is ready logistics, then the Quonset hut turned into one in every of America's maximum unsung weapons. Through the struggle's quit, it did not remember in case you were on a Pacific atoll, a French farmyard, or an Arctic outpost, you'd see the equal curved roof status against the sky. They were proof that the USA hadn't simply shipped men remote places. It had shipped an entire civilization with them. While the weapons eventually fell silent in 1945, most people anticipated the Quonset hut to fade away with the warfare. In the end, those metallic arches had been supposed to be transient, a brief restoration for an urgent crisis. But that's no longer what passed off. As an alternative, they started out a second lifestyles, one that would shape post-war the USA in methods nobody should have expected. First, there was the instant problem. What to do with all those huts? With extra than 100,000 constructed, America's Army all at once had a surplus on its hands. Many had been dismantled and offered as scrap, but heaps more have been shipped, returned home, or left status distant places. The timing changed into best due to the fact America changed into coping with its personal housing crisis. Millions of GIs were returning from Europe and the Pacific, and the GI invoice changed into fueling a surge in university enrollments. Cities and universities wished locations for these guys and their new families to stay and rapid. Quonset huts have become an immediately solution. Throughout the United States, schools installation entire hut villages for veterans. On the College of Michigan, as an instance, returning GIs and their families lived in Quonset hut communities complete with kitchens, bedrooms, and even little yards. Other colleges like the University of Minnesota, Brown, and UCLA did the identical. These villages were not glamorous. Many other halves joked approximately cooking in a 1-2-cylinder kitchen. However, they had been low-cost, rapid, and better than not anything. Past universities, entire towns sprouted Quonset hut neighborhoods. A few were transformed into church buildings, diners, or even dance halls. Small groups bought surplus huts and turned them into workshops, garages, and warehouses. Farmers cherished them too, the use of the huts as barns and storage sheds. For a technology that had simply fought a war described by way of scarcity, these prepared-made systems felt like items. And they did not simply live in America. Foreign places, Quonset huts left behind at some point of the conflict were absorbed into local communities. In places just like the Philippines, Guam, and even components of Europe, humans used them for houses, faculties, and shops long after the Americans had moved on. The huts that have been supposed to disappear after the battle have become landmarks of survival and healing. Still, they were not perfect. Households often complained of poor insulation, leaky roofs, and the consistent creak of metallic. Winters had been brutally cold, summers sweltering hot. However, for plenty, those huts represented balance in a chaotic post-struggle world. They were a stepping stone, a roof overhead, at the same time as something greater permanent become constructed. The strangest part, some huts refused to die. By using the 1950s and 60s, lots were still standing, patched with new siding, home windows, or insulation. Even nowadays, you can locate original WWII Quonset huts dotting American landscapes, some rusted and deserted, others nevertheless in use as storage or workshops. What started out as a wartime necessity ended up reshaping peacetime the US. The Quonset hut have become more than just a shelter. It became a bridge from the chaos of war to the promise of rebuilding. And like the infantrymen who lived in them, those huts proved harder and greater enduring than everyone anticipated. Even now, nearly 80 years after the end of worldwide conflict II, the Quonset hut has no longer vanished. In truth, it has ended up a long-lasting symbol of wartime ingenuity, a reminder of the way the US's business may want to resolve issues on a worldwide scale. You may still force across elements of the United States and notice them. Half of cylinders of corrugated metal standing stubbornly in fields on college campuses or at the back of workshops. Some are battered and rusted, others lovingly restored, but they all whisper the identical story. Constructed rapid, built reasonably priced, built to ultimate. The legacy of the Quonset hut is greater than just nostalgia. Architects and historians frequently point to it as a precursor to fashionable prefab housing. The idea of shipping flat percent kits and assembling them on website is something we now accomplish with businesses like IKEA. However, in 1941, America turned into already doing it on a commercial scale. The hut proved that modular design could be each realistic and scalable. And it sparked conversations inside the published struggle years approximately fixing housing shortages with 759 AF83 DBAC 04, 511979469 E6F 58100 A3 homes. For veterans, the huts carried an emotional weight. Many remembered them because the backdrop in their wartime lives, the location wherein they wrote letters domestic, laughed with comrades, or collapsed into exhausted sleep after war. For civilians, the huts became an extraordinary but acquainted website online, dotting landscapes from Rhode Island to remote Pacific that symbolized no longer simply Army electricity, however also the Yankee potential to improvise and adapt. Culturally, the Quonset hut even earned a form of icon fame. Artists painted them, filmmakers used them as backdrops, and writers referenced them as shorthand for the wartime enjoy. Through the 50s, that they had come to be fixtures in American popular culture, embodying each the grit of conflict and the desire of rebuilding. In a few cities, human beings still acquire in community facilities that have been as soon as surplus Quonset huts, their curved roofs arching over dances, conferences, and Sunday offerings. The tale would not cease there. Inside the 21st century, architects and DIY developers have rediscovered the Quonset form for equiusing and low-priced shelters, the identical standards that labored in 1942. Simplicity, sturdiness, and cost efficiency nevertheless make feel these days. Some agencies even manufacture modernized Quonset fashion systems for farms, workshops, and houses, proving that the authentic layout in no way surely went out of favor. And perhaps that's the maximum putting legacy of all. These huts have been supposed to be transient, but like the veterans who once lived in them, they continued. They have become markers of an era's battle and triumph, still status as silent witnesses to the battle that reshaped the arena. So subsequent time you notice one of these curved steel shells standing quietly at the facet of an avenue. Remember the fact that humble hut helped win a world struggle, housed soldiers on every continent, and went on to shape post-war lifestyles in approaches no person ought to have imagined. In its very own quiet way, the Quonset hut is as a whole lot a symbol of global warfare II as the Jeep, the Sherman tank, or the Liberty deliver. Evidence that now and again, the only answers depart the longest shadows.